Which is more important to you? Time, mobility, safety, or money? You have to ask yourself this question and more when deciding which tools to use for cutting EMT conduit and other thin-walled pipes and tubes. Today I'm going to share some common cutting tools and the sacrifices that you make when choosing one method over the other. First, let's talk about the handheld pipe and tube cutter. It's very inexpensive compared to some of the alternative cutting methods that I'll mention later on in the video. It's very approachable and easy to use, and it's often my go-to cutting tool for smaller projects that only require a dozen or so cuts. Because it doesn't require electricity, you can use it anywhere that you want, whether it's in the garden, in the woods, in your living room, or pretty much anywhere else. The cutting wheel, of course, is fairly sharp, but overall it's the safest option out of all the ones that we'll talk about today. They're also pretty compact, which makes them great for modifying builds that are already in place. They're made to cut various sizes and types of pipes and tubes, which makes them really versatile as well. So to recap, tubing cutters are safe, compact, versatile, non-powered, approachable, inexpensive, and easy to use, but how well does it actually perform? Unlike some of the other tools that we'll talk about later on, this one is made specifically for this task, so you'd expect it to work well, and it does. As long as you don't over-tighten the cutting wheel, it precisely cuts straight through thin-walled pipes and tubes. However, after a cut is finished, you'll notice that there is a lip left on the inside of the pipe. This lip can interfere with building accessories like the threaded pipe inserts or plastic end caps. Most handheld tubing cutters have a built-in reamer that isn't the best deburring tool, but it does get the job done well enough so you can clean up the look of the pipe or insert your desired accessories. If you're using rubber pipe feet on the end of the conduit, or if the pipe end is inside of a building connector, then this lip really won't affect anything and you don't have to worry about it. Now so far I've really only shared the positive things about this tool, but as I said, there is no perfect tool for cutting. You have to decide which sacrifices to make based on things like money, safety, and time. The first downside of the tubing cutter is that it requires some physical effort, and if you're doing a lot of cuts, then it can become a workout pretty quickly. You can minimize the required effort by clamping the pipe or tube to a flat surface, but this still doesn't rectify what I believe to be the biggest downside of this cutting tool, which is time. All of the features and benefits of the handheld pipe and tube cutter become irrelevant if you're on a time crunch. If you need to make a lot of cuts in a short amount of time, this is not the tool I'd recommend. A hacksaw can provide many of the same benefits as tubing cutters while also being a quicker alternative. It's still approachable, non-powered, compact, versatile, and fairly inexpensive, especially if you already have a hacksaw that allows you to swap out the blades. Speaking of which, you'll want to get a blade or a hacksaw and blade combo that is made specifically for cutting metals like steel. You want to make sure the blade is thin and has at least 24 TPI, or teeth per inch. While this method is faster than a tubing cutter, it also has quite a few disadvantages that result from prioritizing speed. It doesn't require power, but you are going to need some kind of bench or flat surface that you can use to support the pipe or tube as you cut through it. Unlike the tubing cutter, you won't be able to move around freely and cut at the same time. You'll also find that you're trading precision and cleaner cuts for speed. Unless you make some kind of jig, the hacksaw is going to be hard to control once its cutting path is started. This will often result in a crooked pipe end. This could potentially be a big problem if the pipe you're cutting is intended to be used as a vertical leg in a desk or something like that. Tubes that are cut with a hacksaw will also have pretty jagged edges. These can be difficult to remove and often require a metal file or power tool to completely smooth them out. The speed of the cuts is also based on the physical effort that you want to put into it. You can go slow if you want, or you can go crazy and saw through the pipe really fast. If you want to reduce the physical effort and time that is required for a manual hacksaw, you can use a powered reciprocating saw, or what's more commonly known as a sawzall. You want to make sure that you use a blade that is at least 6 inches long and designed for cutting metal. The benefits and sacrifices of the reciprocating saw are pretty easy to identify. Basically, any positive or negative trait of the hacksaw is amplified when you attach a motor to it. It's faster and requires less energy to operate than a tubing cutter, but these motorized quick cuts often result in really crooked and jagged edges. You also have to consider the fact that this tool requires power, which means you're going to need a battery-powered version, or you'll have to be tethered to an electrical outlet or extension cord. These versions won't make it as portable as the previous two cutting tools, but again, sacrifices have to be made when you're prioritizing speed over other things. Now let's talk about safety. Anytime you're cutting anything, there are inherent risks. With that said, we're introducing a whole new variable into the safety equation. We now have this extremely sharp blade that is motorized and capable of cutting through steel with just a touch of a button. You want to be extremely careful and wear appropriate safety gear when using this type of saw or any of the ones that I mentioned in this video. On that note, we might as well get the next option out of the way. Angle grinders are insanely useful and often capable of doing things that no other saw or cutting tool is. This often makes it necessary for certain jobs. However, cutting EMT conduit is not one of those jobs in my opinion. The speed of cutting thin-walled pipes with a grinder is not worth the safety risks. If you absolutely must do it, then you want to make sure to use a cutting wheel that is at least 4 inches in diameter and is specifically designed for cutting through steel. Now it's pretty obvious with this cutting method that you're sacrificing safety, which again, in my opinion, is not worth it since there are overall better options out there. Band saws are most commonly used for cutting unique and precise shapes out of wood, but they can also cut thin-walled pipes and tubes pretty easily if you have the right blade installed. You just want to make sure it's rated for metal and has a high tooth count. You could also potentially use a chop saw to cut through thin-walled pipes and tubes if you interchange an abrasive cutting wheel or blade that is specifically designed for cutting through the metal that you're working with. The same goes for miter saws. They're similar to chop saws except they serve a more specific purpose, which is cutting precise angles in tube materials. This type of cut isn't normally used in DIY pipe builds unless you're welding them together or creating some kind of angled leg, which brings up the question, why would you use a miter saw or really any of these three saws for cutting pipes and tubes like EMT conduit? I think these options are mostly beneficial if you already own the saw and can purchase the appropriate blades that are needed to use them for cutting metal pipes and tubes. Otherwise, you're going to be paying a large upfront cost to get them. You also want to consider the space that is required to use these types of saws. They have a large footprint and require power, so you can't just set up and use them anywhere. Using these saws will either sacrifice portability or cost, or a combination of both. Now with that said, all three of these saw types will offer fast and clean cuts, which is great if you already have them set up and can buy the appropriate blades for them. If you have the budget, you can also buy a couple of specialized tools that are made to cut pipes and tubes really easily. The first one is most commonly used in an industrial setting and is going to be overkill for most home projects. It's known as a cold saw and functions very similarly to a chop saw. However, it's designed specifically for cutting metal pipe. It shoots coolant at the metal to prevent it from overheating, which is why it gets the name cold saw. They are rather expensive, but if you have access to one, you should definitely take advantage of it because it allows you to cut multiple pipes at once really cleanly, and it's a great tool. Portable bandsaws are another specialized cutting tool, and they're much more accessible. They function the same way as a normal bandsaw, but they're battery powered and come in a more portable and compact housing, which allows them to be used for cutting thin-walled pipes and tubes really easily. These are commonly used by electricians because of how convenient and fast they are. I've used one quite a bit, and overall I think it's the best option in terms of speed and portability if you're okay with sacrificing a budget. I will say that similarly to the hacksaw, it's kind of hard to control once the cut has started, which makes it difficult to cut perfectly straight. There are some ways that you can minimize this though. MKE Gadgets shared a 3D printed clamping jig that is really cool and keeps the cut straight. Check out his video linked in the description. You can also get adapters that convert portable bandsaws into a chop saw of sorts. I haven't tried any specific ones, but from what I've heard, they work pretty well. The only other downside that I've experienced with a portable bandsaw is the jagged edges that are left over after a cut is complete. You'll need a metal file or other deburring tool to smooth the pipe in completely, which is something to keep in mind. Me personally, in most cases, this is a compromise I'm willing to make if I need the speed. For example, when we went to Saunders Machine Works, we had a couple of days slotted out to build 5 different carts and packing stations. Over those 2 days, we made at least a couple hundred cuts, and there's no doubt in my mind that we wouldn't have finished everything in time if we were using something like the handheld pipe and tube cutter. It's not the right tool for everybody, and that's kind of the whole point of this video. I hope you found the information helpful and are able to figure out which tool makes the most sense for your needs and projects. If you want to see our review of the Milwaukee portable bandsaw that we use, or learn the different methods for deburring pipe ends, check out these other videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.